Welcome back to another edition of Office Hours, where I answer your questions about the college application process, how to plan for college, and really anything else that's college related that you had questions about. Today I've got a number of questions, both from email and from the internet to look at, so let's get started. The first question is, where do poorer kids who are college ready go to college? They say there are low-income kids who do succeed academically in spite of their circumstances, get good grades, good test scores, etc. However, when it comes time for college, how will they afford it? Even in-state schools are very expensive. I'll use my state as an example. Tuition at the University of Kansas costs $12,000 a year. This does not include living expenses or books and supplies. How do they afford college costs? And financial aid is a very complicated sort of topic. It's not something that I personally specialize in, although there are people who do. But what I can say is that there's a big difference between that sticker price. Think of it like buying a car. You've got the sticker, which is the price that's on the windshield. And then when you get inside and you actually start talking to the dealership and the salespeople, they might, at a car dealership, they'll try to add on costs, right? But when it comes to college, sort of the sticker is the maximum that you'll pay, and then there are going to be discounts. And so it'll never get more expensive. And well, every year the sticker price changes, but in a given year, if you see the sticker price, it's not going to necessarily go higher than that price for that year. So what'll realistically happen is, if you have really good test scores and really good GPA, you might get some sort of scholarships or merit aid. If you are quote unquote poorer or socioeconomically disadvantaged in some way, it's also possible that there are going to be scholarships that are catering to you as an individual. You might have like a first gen scholarship or a low income student scholarship. Here in the state of California, we have Cal Grant, which goes to students to attend California private schools or California state universities or the UC system schools. And so that's just money that goes straight into your tuition or straight into your cost of college and reduces that total dollar amount that you're going to end up paying. The other reality is that you should fill out the FAFSA. And if you do fill out the FAFSA, and I know this year in particular, the FAFSA was particularly awful. But if you do fill out the FAFSA, you're going to get federal financial aid, some of which might come in the form of grants, and some of which you don't have to pay back. Let me say that. Some of them might come in the form of subsidized loans, and some might come in the form of unsubsidized loans. So, well, what does that mean? A subsidized loan is one where while you are in school, and for 6 months after you graduate, no interest accumulates on that loan. The government is essentially paying your interest payments while you are a student. And they give you that 6-month buffer after you graduate to find a job so that you can start taking over those payments yourself. After that 6-month buffer, then you need to start making those interest payments yourself. And any time within that window, you can pay down the principal on your loan as well. You don't have to let it sit the entire 4 years. So if you go get a summer job and you pay back a couple $1,000s here, a couple $1,000s there, that's great. Or you use that money for other things and just let that balance sit. That's also okay. It really depends on your financial situation and your ability to sort of make money and work while you're in school or over the summer. But the subsidized loan is nice because no interest accumulates, and that's great. The unsubsidized loan is the one where interest does accumulate while you are in school. And this is the kind of loan that gets a lot of students into trouble because they don't necessarily realize what compounding interest is going to do to make that payment balloon. So if it compounds monthly, then every month that, 3% or 5% or whatever the interest rate happens to be, that gets added to the loan total. And then the next month's interest not only includes the amount that you borrowed, but it includes the amount of interest that accumulated from the previous month. And so we call that compounding. It will add up and up and up, and the interest payments will get bigger and bigger and bigger as you sort of let that loan sit there. You don't have to make any payments on a student loan while you are a student. And again, for that 6-month window after you graduate, But if you have an unsubsidized loan, it's really smart to try and have a job or something where you can make those interest payments at least. If you can make interest payments and pay down a little bit of principal, that's even better. But again, that's a really individualized decision. When it comes to private schools, a lot of them will offer you merit aid. And merit aid or merit scholarships are money that the institution is giving you to reduce your tuition so that you have less to pay. So even though the sticker price on a private school might appear higher, once you take into account, your high GPA, your test scores, the fact that you're maybe like first gen or a low income student that they really want to attract and support and be able to say like, hey, we help out these sorts of students, your costs might be equal to or perhaps less than the cost of your state flagship public school. It really depends. And so how do sort of people on the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder pay for college? A lot of it will come in the form of merit aid or grants or these, hopefully, subsidized loans. There are maximums on the size of a subsidized loan that you can get every year, and there is like a maximum that you can accumulate in total. So if you end up not getting enough sort of grant money or merit money, you may use up your yearly limit on subsidized loans, and there might be an unsubsidized loan on top of that. Hopefully not, but again, your mileage may vary because financial aid is a very individualized process. So that's essentially how it gets done. Someone else asks, I'm a rising senior who's been sick with a chronic illness that's left me bedridden and out of school for the last year. My school's online/virtual program has no teachers, and they basically just watch you on a Zoom call. So I had to drop all of my AP classes as well. My GPA was a 3.75 before this year, and is now somewhere around a 3.4. I'm also needing to retake an English and PE course over the summer. My biggest worry is that I'll be perceived as lazy or unintelligent because of my dropping grades and the decrease in my course rigor this year. I plan to get back on track senior year and take a mix of dual enrollment and AP classes that fit with my schedule. My school only offers like 3 APs and mostly dual enrollment. And naturally, I'll be doing my best to get near perfect grades. Which brings me to my question. Will admissions officers take my illness into account when reviewing my applications? The answer is yes, if you tell them. If you do not tell them, then no, they won't take your illness into account because they won't know. If you're lucky, your school counselor might include that information in their letter, or your recommenders might include that information in their letter. But it's really incumbent upon you to make sure that the application reader, whether that's an admission officer or just a reader or someone else, has all that information available to them. They will not assume facts that you do not tell them. So be specific. You want to talk about the kind of illness you had and what the result was. If you were hospitalized for 6 months, obviously you're not going to be in school while you're in the hospital. If your recovery was an additional 6 months after that and you could only do limited school or Zoom classes because you were in like physical therapy and basically immobile or something, you need to tell them that, right? Because they're not going to know otherwise. They're just going to see this dip in your grades and all of your APs dropping after a semester. And then they're going to be like, what just happened to this kid? Like, it'll be clear that something happened, but they won't know. So this is where the additional information section comes in really handy. On the Common App, you'll have an additional information section in the main Common Application piece where you'll have some space to write a little bit of your circumstances. I've written blog posts about the additional information section and what we should not use it for, but this is definitely something that you want to write about. You want to tell them again what the illness was, what happened to you during that illness. You want to talk about how that affected your schooling, why you had to drop classes, why your grades suffered. And then you can talk a little bit about your plan going forward, but they'll also see that represented in your transcript when they start getting your first semester, senior year, like mid-year report. But you definitely want to tell them. In the UC application, for example, there's actually multiple additional information sections peppered across the entire application. And so under the academics section, you would want to find the additional information box and include that information there as well so that they know. This also sounds to me a little bit like something that you might be able to write an essay about, as long as there's some sort of takeaway or some sort of learning that you've gained from this challenge. If there's something that going through this has done to change who you are as a person, or change how you look at the world, or look at yourself, or look at responsibility, or your schooling, education, etc., etc., there are essay topics in the Common App and in the UC app that would allow you to talk about this experience. And that's another way for them to learn more about your situation. If you write about it in the additional information, I would say you don't feel pressured to also write about it in your essays. But if it really stands out to you as an experience that's meaningful beyond your other experiences that you've had or other things that you've done, then it's potentially one of many topics that you could write about, like for the UC essays, where you have 4 choices and it would represent one of your 4. For the Common App essay, you might consider writing about some other aspect of yourself. But if this is far and away the most meaningful thing, then perhaps you will write about it. And you would use like the overcoming a challenge or a barrier topic would be my assumption. So short answer, yes, they do care, but only if you tell them. Let's see. Another student asks, is it a good idea to apply to a safety college ED? I personally don't like the word safety. I'm going to sort of go on a tangent here for a second and say safety has a particular connotation these days. If you don't like a school, and a lot of students, they're safety schools or schools that they're not terribly excited about, I wouldn't apply there. I call them likely schools because I'm thinking about the chances of admission. So we have like likely, target, less likely, and then sort of schools that I call gambles, just because the odds are so low that almost everyone is gambling on whether or not they're going to get in. So for the likely schools, hopefully you're excited about them. Are you excited enough about it to apply ED? I probably wouldn't recommend you do that. For those of you who don't know, ED stands for early decision. This is a contractually binding agreement that you, your parents, and your school counselor are making with a college. You are telling them, if you accept me, I will go to your school. I will. No ifs, ands, or buts. The only way to get out of such an agreement really is for severe financial hardship. Because if you apply ED, there's almost zero incentive for the school to offer you any money to help you pay for college, because oftentimes that free money is an incentive to get you to enroll. But if you apply ED, you're contractually obligated to enroll, so there's no incentive to provide you money. So severe financial hardship, or maybe a change in your life circumstances, maybe one of your parents loses their job or something happens. Hopefully there's not something tragic like a death in the family, but these things happen. So if there's a change in your circumstances or financial hardship, you can get out of those ED agreements usually, but it is contractually binding. Your parents are signing it. Your school counselor is signing it so that you don't ED to more than one school. So do you want to do that to a likely school? I would say no, because if they let you in, and the whole point is to have a school on there that's likely to admit you, so they are likely to admit you in the first place. Applying early increases that likelihood of you getting in. And then if you do get in, or when you do get in, you're contractually obligated to go. So you can just take all your other applications and drop them in the trash, which for some students is great. I've had students who got into schools ED and they come to me mid-December and they're like, I'm done. I don't have to write another essay. And they're so happy and they're so excited. But usually people reserve ED applications, or their one ED application, for schools that they're really, really trying to reach for, or that they really, really, really are passionate about going to. for one reason or another. Because of that contractual obligation, the odds of students getting in is generally a little bit higher. Not as many students will apply ED to a lot of schools because of that obligation. Now, on the other hand, if you wanted to apply early action, or EA, that is a non-binding early application, which also tends to increase the statistical likelihood of admission. That you might do to a likely school or to a number of likely schools. I've had students who wanted to use their EAs for their likely schools so that they would hear back early and sort of know that they got in. Having an acceptance letter in your hand can do amazing things for your anxiety or your stress levels. So for those of you who are anxious, I would encourage you to apply to what we call a rolling admission school, which is a school that keeps their application open for a long period of time, and they just accept students as they send in applications. So if you send in an application in August, they might get back to you within 2 to 3 weeks and say, hey, look, you got in. If you want to come, please, send us your deposit and enroll. And so you could, in theory, you could walk into October with 1 or 2 acceptance letters in your hand. And that can do a lot to sort of ease the sort of pressure and the stress of like, where am I going to go? Am I going to go anywhere? Some students use their EA to do the same thing. Maybe there's a couple of schools. They're not really excited about any of the schools that do rolling admissions, but they are excited about 1 or 2 that do EA. They can use some of their EA application time on safety schools or likely schools. Other students go the other direction and use their EA application time on their sort of less likely schools or their reach schools, right? Because there is that slightly increased odds of admission. Maybe they feel like they have a better shot at getting in if they apply early to those schools instead. But should you use your early decision application slot on a likely school? Not unless you're really, 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 really serious about going there as your first choice. And it does happen. Right. There are students I've talked to who are really passionate about schools that have really high admission rates. Maybe their parents went there. Maybe they've been a fan of the school sports team since they were a kid. Maybe their favorite uncle went to that school, or there's a myriad reasons why a student might be interested in a particular school. And if the admissions rates are high, they can still use, if the school takes early decision applicants, which not a lot do in the grand scheme of things, you could use your ED for that. But for most people, I would say no. Don't lock yourself in to a likely school that way with some sort of contractual obligation. There's no need to. Okay, I've got 2 more questions and then I'm going to sort of wrap up here. So let's see. This one's from the internet. The student says, I'm confused about what to do as far as sending scores to colleges. So when I apply to a school and they allow self-reporting, should I just self-report my scores and then send them to the school if I'm accepted? Or do I send official score reports through College Board to all of the schools I'm applying to? Also, how does super scoring work? Do I just send scores from both test dates and the college only takes into account the highest score from each? Essentially, this person's got it right. Most schools are going to allow you to self-report your scores. So you get to write in whatever score you got. Now, you might think, why wouldn't I just write in that I got like a 1560? You could. That's lying. But what happens is if you do get in, when you go to enroll, they're going to say, okay, now can you please send us the official score report from College Board with that 1560? And if you can't produce that score report and that was a deciding factor in your acceptance, that acceptance is going to go away. That could get you onto some sort of blacklist for future admissions. Like if you wanted to say, go to grad school or go get a PhD or an MBA or something, right? If you wanted to apply to that school again in the future for one of those things, they're not going to accept you, even if you met all their criteria and would be a perfect applicant. We still don't want to be dishonest, but they will allow you to self-report your scores, because if you think about the number of applications that some of these colleges get, can you imagine an extreme example? UCLA, right? They're getting like 120 something thousand applicants. Might be slightly higher. I might be off by 10 or 20,000, but over 100,000 applicants, right? If every single applicant had to send in a College Board score report, that'd be 100,000 score reports that they'd be receiving. And so they don't want 100,000 envelopes showing up in their admissions office that somebody then has to open, look at the name for, find the file, and sort it. So you're not going to send official score reports to most of your schools. There will be some schools that want the official report instead of self-reporting, and they will say so. They will straight up tell you, please send us an official report by the document deadline. We want that. But for the most part, you're just self-reporting your scores. The other question was, how does super scoring work? Do I send in the scores from both test dates and the college only takes into account the higher score from each? Yes. If you are self-reporting a super score, you are going to put in your highest EBRW, your evidence-based reading and writing, and your highest math, and then add those up and get your highest composite. That's how you would self-report that. When it's time to submit the score reports, come April or May, you will send the 2 test dates that have those scores in them. They will receive those and they will see the super score on the report, and that's it. If you are applying to a school that wants official reports, when you send the official reports in, those will get entered into their system, and the person will only see the super score. The highest English score and the highest math score will automatically appear in your application with that highest composite. There may be a way for the application reader to dig in and find your actual scores and see, the 2 or 3 test dates that you sent in, if we're doing like an ACT, for example. But they're probably not going to have the time to do that or the inclination. That would be something that might happen if you're not an immediate yes or an immediate no. You go to like a committee or something, and they're going to look at your application a little bit more closely. But in general, for 90% of applicants, they're just going to look at the super score. They're going to see that on there, and they're just going to say okay and move on with their day because they have thousands of applications to get through. So this person who wrote in absolutely nailed exactly how it works. Self-report your super scores, and then later you'll send in that report if you end up going to that school. If it's an official report school, then you send in the scores for the test dates that have your highest section scores, and the reader will really only see the highest scores at most colleges. And they're not necessarily going to hold against you the other scores if they do happen to see like all the individual test dates and then they see the super score. If the school's policy is to super score, they're just going to look at the super score and move on with their applications. Okay. Last question. This is another standardized testing question. This student writes, should I take the October 5th SAT if I'm applying early decision? Results should come out in 2 weeks. Now, for those of you who don't know, early decision applications are due November 1st. So if this student takes the test on October 5th, they're going to have 26 days between their application deadline and the date that they took the test. And like they pointed out, scores usually come out in about 2 weeks, especially in this day and age of digital testing and digital score reporting. Those scores come out very fast. So should you take the October 5th SAT? If you want to, you can. If you think that you're going to raise your score, great, go for it. If you're confident that there's not going to be any sort of like logistical issue or testing issue at the site where you are taking the SAT that might result in your test being canceled last minute, go ahead. If you can take the test earlier than that, I would take it earlier than that. If you can get into the August test date, do it. Because just a few months ago, we had an issue in Oakland where 1,400 students had their test date canceled. College Board said, oh yeah, we'll refund you the money. But the money wasn't the issue, because since like 2 days after the scheduling system opened on College Board, all the testing sites in the Bay Area have been full. Having their test date canceled totally just messed up these kids' applications. They're not likely to be able to get another testing site between now and December. So if they needed that, if they were, say, seniors and they needed it for their November 1st applications, they're in trouble. If they're juniors, they still have a little bit more time, but the ideal time to take the test would have been this fall. And so if they were trying to get it done early, that's just not possible anymore. There are always going to be logistical issues and hurdles that come up. So when you're taking the test that close to the deadline, any little thing could change your plans. Also, you might get a score that you're not happy with. And if you're not happy with it, there's nothing you can do about it. You have 0 time to take another test. So just keep that in mind as you are signing up or counting on these sorts of things. But will your score come out in time for a November 1st application? Absolutely it will. So if you take that October 5th SAT, you can use that score as part of your November 1st applications. If you're applying to a school that wants an official score report, usually there is like a 1 to 2 week grace period for documents. The application deadline might be November 1st. The document deadline might be November 7th or November 10th or November 15th. Every school is a little bit different, so you want to check their website to see what the document deadline is. A few schools, they say the application must be complete by November 1st. Other schools give you that grace period to get documents in. So really look carefully at those windows, because if they want the application complete by November 1st and they want an official score report, as soon as that score comes out, you need to mail that report, because it could take, 5 to 10 business days for that score report to reach the school. If there's a grace period, I would still order the score report as soon as possible, but you're not going to be, clenched and anxious about whether or not that score report's going to reach their office in time. Just keep an eye on that information. And with that, that's all the questions that I have for today. If you have questions, you can go ahead and email me at collegequestions@dawsacademics.com, or you can reach out to me via my website,